Welcome to Flip Lesson 58 for the 6th grade. Today we are looking at probability. And as we look at probability, we want to explore some of the different terms that go along with probability. Because this lesson can take a little bit longer, if you're watching this video on Jing, there will actually be 2 videos to get you through this lesson. Just so I don't go too fast through the lesson with you. It's hard to follow. Alright? Together, if you watch 2 videos or 1 YouTube, it should be about the same. Alright, let's look at our problem here. It says Max spins the spinner 16 times. About how many times can he expect the spinner to land on green? The first idea we want to look at is what's known as sample space. The sample space is also known as the number of outcomes. What are the possible outcomes? What answers could we get? And of course, if we were to look at this, usually we use brackets to help us understand that, is we could get a green answer, a blue answer, orange answer, and a red answer. Those are the possible outcomes to this. These are not the probabilities, it's just the possible answers that we could get. So understanding sample space is understanding what are the possibilities of what we could get. We could get each of those possibilities. Now, we want to understand, okay, if the spinner is spun 16 times, about how many times can you expect the spinner to land on green? Now we're going to look at the actual spinner and say, okay, I see that the sample space has 4. So I have 4 possible outcomes. And the question says I want one of those 4. I want the green outcome. So I have a 1 out of 4 possibility of landing on green. Without actually spinning this, we can now take 1/4 of 16, or 1/4 times 16. Right? This is going to give you 16 over 4, which is going to equal 4. So, on average, not on average, the probability of this would say that about 4 times you should get green. About 4 times. Now, we could change our spinner around. By looking at our spinner now, we have a very different spinner. Right? Our sample space has changed. We no longer have blue. And so if we were to rewrite the sample space, we would say that our sample space would say that we have a green option, an orange option, and a red option. Now, if we go back to the problem again, what is the probability of landing on green? Right? Green now takes up half of the circle. And so I have a 1 out of 2 chance, right? Because it's covering 2 out of the 4 old sections, right? Which is a 1/2. And so in the end, I have a 1/2 probability. So now if I were to answer the question, that would be 1/2 times 16, which is going to give me 16 over 2. And according to probability, now of the 16 times spins, 8 of the times should be. So we have our first look at probability. Let's take another look. It says a prediction of the game says that the Seahawks win 70% of their games. Here's the idea of chance, right? Percentage is chance. What is the probability of their win record? Win record. So the first thing we want to do is, okay, 70% says chance. So how are we going to convert 70 into a fraction to get probability? And the easiest way to do that is take 70 and put it over 100. And of course, that's going to be a 70 hundredths. And then I can reduce that to 7 tenths. And so we have a probability of their win record being 7 tenths. Attached to this, we have the idea of what's known as the complement, or the opposite of given. If our win is a 7 tenths, what would our losing be, right? That would be a 30% chance, or 30 over 100, which would then equal 3 tenths probability. That's going to be the end of the first video. Continuing on if you're watching on YouTube. All right, so we have these ideas. We have sample space, we have complement, we're figuring out probability. Another example. How are we actually going about doing this? So the number cube is rolled. Find a probability that the upturned number is greater than 2. Then find the complement. So if I'm going to roll this dice, and as I roll this dice, I want the number to be greater than 2. So that's going to be 3, 4, 5, or 6. All right. 3, 4, 5, or 6. So we're going to follow this simple formula. We have number of outcomes of the event, all right? Sometimes we would call this our desired outcomes, what we want, compared to the number of possible outcomes. What are the possibilities? What are all the possible answers that we could get when it comes to rolling another cube? When it comes to a 6-sided cube, the number of possibilities would be 6. There are 6 sides to the cube. There are 6 possible answers. However, we want the number of outcomes that we desire. What do we want? We want sides that are greater than 2. So that would be 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 4 desired outcomes. So we have a 4 out of 6. Right. 4 out of 6. Now, of course, this is a fraction, and it can be reduced to 2/3. So we can divide by 2. Divide by 2. So we have a 2 out of a 3 chance to get a number that is greater than 2. In other words, a 4 out of 16. Okay, so now we want to look at the idea of an opposite. Right? What is the other outcome? The other outcome would say I'm going to get a 1 or a 2. Right? So if there are 6 possibilities, if I'm going to get a 1 or a 2, there are 2, which of course, the opposite of 2/3 is going to be 1/3. In the end, you should start to see a relationship between the complements and, well, these complements, right? 2/3 plus 1/3 equals 1. So if you add these two ideas, complements together, they should always equal 1. So we have these ideas. Let's do another one together, just to continue working with these ideas. Because a bag contains 3 red marbles, 2 yellow marbles, and 1 green marble. Without looking, Sarah draws a marble from the bag and notes its color. So she has these marbles over here. She's going to throw them in her bag. And now we want to start figuring things out. It says, what is the probability of drawing a red marble? All right. Following our formula, we want to know, first of all, what are all the possibilities? I have green, 1 green, 2 yellow, 3 red. So adding those together, I have a total of 6 marbles in the bag. Don't believe me? There they are, 6 marbles. Okay. Now, I want a red marble. There are 3 red marbles in there. So I have a possibility of 3 out of 6 together. And so in the end, we would reduce that, and I have a 1/2 probability of drawing red. So what is the complement of this event? In other words, what would the other option be? Right, in words. And of course, the other option would be not red, or that it would be yellow or green. And of course, what is the probability of that complement? What is the opposite of 1/2? Kind of becomes silly because the opposite of 1/2 is 1/2. There's a 1/2 chance that we're going to get a yellow or a green. One of those two. Not just one of those. One of those two. But we start to see how these things work together. Alright, I'm going to leave you with this sample problem now, working with some coins. As you look at this, work through this, and think about all these different ideas. Sample space, complements, and then just how to find probability. That is lesson